Being with us here today. It's my first chance to get to know you a little bit, and I hope we can find ways to work together, although you've heard a lot of us on the committee have deep concerns with the president's budget, so I hope we can coerce you into making some changes in this budget as we move along. I need to say, like some of my colleagues had before me, we certainly disagree with the administration's stand on the Paris Accord, and I come from the state of Maine where people have a lot of concerns about climate change, and it has an effect on our lives every day. I also want to just mention I was with a bipartisan group of my colleagues in Germany a couple of weeks ago when the announcement was made, and a lot of our colleagues in the Bundestag and the government over there were just so shocked that we would make this decision, and also worried that they couldn't trust the United States anymore to keep with an agreement, and I want to echo those sentiments. But I want to get into a little more specifics, because sometimes I think we pit these environmental issues and talk about them as sort of the idea of it's environmental extremists against businesses, and as someone who comes from the state of Maine and understands the importance of the environment and the economy working together, and how much I hear about it from my constituents, climate change to us is very real. It's not an environmental platitude. I live in a lobster fishing area. In fact, I would say proudly that the highest lobster landings in the world are in my in Penobscot Bay where I live. So I see lobster fishermen every day, and they look at me with this fear in their eyes of saying, you know, what are we going to do? The ocean is warming around us. We're watching the migration of lobsters up into the coast, and once they get to Canada, they're going to belong to them, not us. We don't get them back. We've seen the disappearance in the shrimping industry, and as my colleague Mr. Kilmer said, between the fishing industry and tourism, these are important to our identity. They're important economically, and I can't go home and say to people, this isn't really happening. I can't go home to say to the people in the shellfish industry, ocean acidification doesn't exist. Don't worry about it. It's going to go away. And we may sometimes disagree on this committee about the causes of climate change, but doing something about it is critical, and we can't back out of these agreements. I also represent a huge coastline, and with sea level rising, we may not see it every day just the way they do in Miami Beach, but we see it when people try to get a mortgage or sell their home or get insurance. These are economic issues, and when you talk about uncertainty in the marketplace, whether it's fishermen or farmers or people who live in coastal communities, these are the people I deal with every day, and they're looking at this with fear and concern, and they're saying to me, and I'm saying to myself, what am I going to tell my grandchildren if we don't do something about it? So that's my first concern. The second one, and I feel a little bit like Mr. Kilmer, I could go on for 500 minutes, and I feel confident the chair won't let me do that, kind as he is. But there's the economic question for tourism states, for fishing states, for natural resources states, and maybe you say one size doesn't fit all, and it's not the same in Oklahoma, and I understand it's different when the fossil fuel industry is in your backyard. But I represent one of those states that's in the tailpipe of the fossil fuel industry, and I want to talk a little bit about clean air. We have deep concerns about the cuts in this budget and your approach to this. And I'm looking for any way I possibly can to work with you, but people in my area have deep concerns. You were an attorney general that sued the Environmental Protection Agency, that disagreed with these ideas, that was the head of the Republican Attorney Generals Association that got a lot of money from the Fossil Fuel Association. And I know we all get criticized at times for who supports the work that we do, and I want to take you at your word. So I want you to hear in my state, this doesn't work so well. We've been the 80th, we're the most oil dependent state in the nation. So we know how hard it is to get over our fossil fuel dependence. And we're deeply concerned about cuts potentially to energy independence, because if we can't have more solar and more wind, we can't have that healthy balance. And we're deeply concerned about the rollback of clean air rules and the cuts in this administration. We have one of the highest rates of childhood asthma, and that's just a tragedy. The fact that so many people in our state have to deal with the impacts of being at the end of the tailpipe about coal-fired power plants and the dirty air coming to our state. What do you think it's like to see the highest rate of emergency room admissions because of asthma, or to have ozone alerts in the middle of our tourism season? We just can't say to people, don't come visit our state because the air is going to be dirty right now. And again, you said uncertainty of the marketplace. This creates a lot of uncertainty. So you've heard a lot of our concerns. You said we should celebrate the downturn in CO2 levels. Well, those are because we've had higher fuel efficiency standards and because we've invested more in clean energy. But your budget does all the opposite. It also cuts your commitment to our states. And we can't leave states holding the bag. About 100 employees at our Department of Environmental Protection are funded through the federal government. We don't get that money back if you take it all away. So obviously I've piled on you with a million concerns, and it's only a few, but I think I represent what I'm hearing every day. And I don't see how more cooperation or more efficiency replaces those 4,000 employees you're about to cut, or put some of the money back into these programs we care about.
Let me say first that I look forward to us, as you indicated, working together. I appreciate you saying that, and it's something that I endeavor to do as well. With respect to attainment issues, it actually is a priority of our administration to focus on achieving better attainment outcomes. As you know, when you look at asthma, you mentioned asthma, the two criteria pollutants that we regulate under the NAAQS program, there are several, 6, but 2 of them predominantly impact asthma, particulate matter and ozone. We have, the PM 2.5 standard is better than any that are in Europe, and we are making, I believe, tremendous progress toward achieving good health outcomes for our citizens. But Congresswoman, I really believe that we can do more. When I say celebrate progress, I just think we have to recognize that we have prioritized it as a country, that we should recognize the success that we've achieved, but it doesn't mean that we stop. It means that we work with the states to get better data, not modeled data, but monitored data, real-time data, and then focus on compliance and assistance with those states to achieve better outcomes in the attainment program. With respect to CO2, you know, I want to say to you, the President, when he announced withdrawal from the Paris Accord, said something else as well. He said that he wanted to continue engagement on this issue. I just left the G7. I spent 4 days in Bologna with my counterparts, and we started bilateral discussions. I started bilateral discussions with them with respect to our continued leadership with respect to CO2 reduction. And that's another area that we need to recognize the progress we've made. You mentioned, you know, the progress we've made through government regulations, predominantly in the mobile source area. But innovation and technology has brought about a tremendous amount of CO2 reductions, particularly hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, a conversion to natural gas that powers our power grid. And what we should be focused upon as a nation, as we generate electricity using various forms of energy, from coal to natural gas to oil to hydro to renewables, we need to focus on using the latest technology that reduces emissions in a very meaningful way, and focus on leading in international discussions, exporting that type of innovation and technology. This is not a sign of disengagement. The President made that clear. It's a sign of saying that we're going to approach it from a way of demonstrating real action toward reducing CO2 through the implementation of what we've done in the past several years.
I appreciate your thoughts, and I hope it is not a sign of disengagement, and that we are going to continue to be focused on CO2. I'm not at all clear how we do that if we reduce the funding for all these areas, and I hope you can continue talking to me about that, because
if I may, I mean, in this regard, I mean, it's very important that Congress really Congress has not addressed this from a stationary source perspective. I mean, we have tremendous regulation in the mobile source category. The auto sector has taken significant steps to reduce GHG emissions and has done an extraordinary job. But as far as the stationary sources, when you look at the Clean Air Act, I don't know how many of you were here in 1990 when the Clean Air Act was amended, but if you ask members that amended that act in 1990, including Congressman Dingell, he described regulation of CO2 and GHG under Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 as being a glorious mess, if that's how, you know, that framework is used. We have to ask the question at the EPA, and this is the reason I mentioned this in my opening comments. We can't just make up our authority. We can't just make up processes to address whatever objectives that have been identified. We have to receive authority and direction and process from this body. So as we evaluate steps that we're going to take at the agency, it will be focused upon what are the tools in the toolbox that we have, and if there is a deficiency of those tools, we will let you know and advise you accordingly, because I think it's very important that we recognize that.
I thank the gentlelady.
I just hope that we can discuss the Clean Power Plan again, because that was about stationary clean air. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentlelady. I'm going to recognize Mr. Coleman. So, but